Really? Okay.
The next question is basically that CPA, and I do a lot of SEC work. I have to follow NIST and not the SEC?
I'll take that to start. It turns out that the kinds of things you need to monitor are common across all these frameworks. So the kind of things that the SEC is asking for actually fold into NIST. In our particular case, we have blended the NIST standard together with C2M2 from the Department of Energy. I'm going to throw a lot of letters at you here, but C2M2 stands for Cybersecurity Capability and Maturity Model. And when you blend those two things together, you can monitor over 300 different control points. And it turns out that all these standards are made of they have the same DNA. They all are asking the same kinds of questions. And so when you look at, for example, the directives that come out of the SEC or the FFIEC or these different financial services bodies, they all tend to be a subset of these 300 controls that we're talking about. So yes, you need to pay attention to those, and especially the specific ones that are in your industry. But it turns out that if you have a really broad and deep generalized solution, you're going to cover all of those anyway.
Well, I guess I'm not going to be done. This is really important what you just said, but to cover for the people out there, would you spend an extra minute or two talking about what the SEC and others may do to director of boards? I think some of the director of boards, depending even on large enterprises, I'm going to be talking a very large one in the apparel market just this afternoon. Yeah. And they feel that they are protected by board of director insurance and other things. Is that going to hold true as we go forward based on what you've told me and taught me about the SEC and what they plan on doing?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a pretty dynamic scene right now. Starting in about 2014, we started hearing things out of the SEC in particular saying that if boards of directors aren't paying attention and haven't been doing anything with regard to cybersecurity, then post-breach, they can be held personally liable. And as we've seen different kinds of regulatory actions and shareholder lawsuits and so forth follow on, what we've seen is that's really actually true. I mean, there's a very significant court case from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in the Wyndham case, which is a highly publicized case. And the Third Circuit essentially said that the Federal Trade Commission had the right to pursue regulatory action against companies. There was a question by Wyndham saying, well, do they really have the right to do this? And the courts are backing up the FTC and the SEC and others that are saying you can't just ignore what's going on and try to write it off as a business expense or whatever, because it does damage to other partners and vendors and customers of yours. You know, their personally identifiable information is being breached, and you have to be doing something. So yeah, there's a lot of risk there. Now, a lot of, as Roy mentioned, there's a lot of corporate directors have always been protected by the corporate veil. In other words, they serve, but they don't take on haven't taken on a lot of personal risk in the past. That's really been rapidly changing in the last 5 or 6 years. The kinds of responsibilities that directors take now, it's caused a lot of directors to even question whether they want to take on the risk of being a director. One of the ways that they've been protected for a long time is through D&O, or directors and officers insurance. And that's the type of insurance that protects you against liability from just general types of lawsuits and shareholder suits and so forth. But even that is being questioned, and what we are seeing now is that D&O insurers, and we've actually talked to some they're starting to carve out cybersecurity. And you can understand the reason they're doing that is because they don't have enough data to be able to underwrite their policies. They don't have enough data to know what to charge for what amount of coverage, because it's just impossible. And so there are some that have already started doing that. Others are wrestling, all of them that we know of are wrestling with the issue and trying to figure out how they're going to get around this. So it's a very significant thing for directors, and directors aren't as protected as they once were.
Thank you.
Roy, I have a good question that I think should be directed towards you. An individual is saying that he is the CTO of his accounting firm, and that everything that he's hearing about laws and regulations are not being brought to his attention. His work with HP or Cisco or the organizations that he bought hardware and software that are very cyber oriented. How come? Uh-oh. Hello?
On the spot. Roy?
I'm back. Am I back?
You're on.
Oh, Alan, I think what you're, if I don't answer this question right, I heard the first part of it. One of the problems inside recent prospects and customers that we've talked to, you said the CTO, but I know for sure in talking to several board members that they are not aware, and I think the CTO would fall into this category, that they've never gone out and had a means, a document, a set of standards or anything to say, outside vendors, do you measure up to these same standards that we've now implemented here? And if they have not, they need to be assigned actions to come up to that. I don't care if it's Cisco or HP or whoever it is. If they're not supplying and they cannot answer, the whole goal is to try to get everybody, external partners, internal individual people that touch the inside the corporation, to be responsible to all the standards that Bob just described. If they, whatever they have to do to develop that, the CTO can not move away from this or plead innocent to this strictly because he has not challenged or questioned your external partners. Was that your question?
To an extent, the individual is trying to ascertain how come when he deals with Cisco, HP, or companies like that, there's no mention at all of standards. There's no mention of requirements or governance from that standpoint. He's really sold a package of firewall and software that's supposed to mitigate the entire responsibility. But here's another question that came in that I think is very in the same area. This individual says our audited compliance people are saying we need to make more and more security considerations. But on hearing you gentlemen talking about standards, I learned more about these standards.
Are you taking that?
This is Bob. You're saying that how do I learn about these standards? Is that what they're asking?
Correct.
Well, a good place to start is by examining the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Information Framework. There's a paper that came out in about 2014, and it's a pretty high level, and it can give you a pretty good overview of that. But if beyond that, there's a lot of reading that we could provide if that person wants to give us their email address. We can forward them a reading list.
It's interesting. Just as I was listening to the congressional meetings yesterday, in regards to the various state attorneys and the state's insurance commissioners, and they were all making references to this formula for standards that they have to get their people to comply with. So, Bob, you're saying that there's a body of standards that accountants, companies start to be aware of in order to monitor their documentation on governance from that perspective.
Yes, I think that all of them need to be aware of the NIST standard in particular, because it's the gold standard that everybody looks at, and that's the best place for them to start. And then with adding to that, within whatever direction they're getting, either out of AICPA or the SEC and other financial related compliance organizations, to bone up and get up to speed on that.
Another question.
Alan, it's Roy.
Yes, go ahead, Roy.
I'm watching our time carefully. I do not know everybody that's on, so I'm going to carefully go back, having been involved in something that was even larger than what we're talking about now. Several years ago, whoever wanted to send data to someone else could use any kind of a file. It could be email, it could be HTTP, whatever it was, and there was a large body called Electronic Data Interchange. A very, very strong body, not government, but a strong body of banks and financial institutions got together, headed by Walmart and Bank of America, enforced a standard policy called PC1, okay, not the payment card industry, okay, Application Standard 1. It failed. The reason that it failed is everybody took the easiest path instead of really learning the necessary standards out of the group they had put together, which were almost 60 companies, and they did not realize that email doesn't work because of the way you briefly described. I may build an email system and I won't elaborate it. It failed. The same two people that I mentioned, Bank of America and Walmart, would not allow it to fail. They restructured the body, brought lots of people in, and came to what is now 90+% of all file transfers done by Application Standard 2. And it is all based on HTTP and that, and everybody uses it. It even slowed down the electronic data interchange market. My analogy is to say this is in its infancy, but don't wait and get caught behind trying to become current with what's there, because they're not going to take your penalties away. They're not potentially going to shut your company down if you violated this just because you thought you had the time to fix it. One of my prospects said, I guess if we don't fix it now, we'll pay later. So, okay, what's the next question?
Roy, if I can add one little factoid onto that too. There was a recent survey by the New York Stock Exchange of 276 public company directors, and 60% of them expect more shareholder suits this year, and 72% expect more regulation. So these are all really smart people that are tracking what's going on. And so I think your point about preparing for that regulation and preparing to see some compliance regulation come down the pike and having to deal with it is a really good one.
Thank you.
Actually,
we have another question. Yes?
Patrick?
Sorry, the question I have actually is, so is the focus shifted over to, is compliance should compliance be the primary focus, or is it point protection, or is it a combination, or what should the focus be?
But they've you need both. You take it, Bob? Okay.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's just like flipping a coin. There's two sides to it. And everything up until recently, as Bob's mentioned, 2014, was all on the technical side. If you had firewall protection, if you had print protection, if you had ID sign-in protection, those are your points that you're talking about, Patrick. What the other side is, and let me tell you, if this was a room, and I don't know if it is, but if this were a room of CFOs, they would be the ones standing up and championing getting over to what are the rules and regulations that we have to follow, and if we don't, it costs us money, because you're now talking to the person whose head usually rolls first, and most compliance and audit people come underneath the CFO. So it's kind of like we read the back cover of the book and thought everything was okay, but we forgot to open the book to read the rest of the details. They go together. Then you have a complete safe system in which to move forward into your marketplace. Is that correct, Bob?
Yes, what I would say is you can think of it as there are external threats, and that's where, as you were saying, that's where all the focus has been until recently, and that's really, really important because the number of those threats is just incredible. I think it's a Verizon study showed that there's like 500,000 threats at any one particular time, and that's a rolling set. So it's really dynamic. It's changing all the time, and so while it's really important to try to get a handle on that, it's important to put the right kinds of technologies in place and processes and procedures and so forth related to risk management. There's a whole lot of other things that you can do internally that you actually have control over. You don't have control over those external threats. You do have control over what you're doing as a company. You have control over putting the right processes in place. You have control over how you're training your people to deal with how they're dealing with their credentials, and you have the ability to have your people like your what am I trying to think of? People that are doing purchasing and so forth, to make sure you're not introducing risk from various sources. So there's a whole raft of things having to do with everything from the risk management processes you have, but also the cultural things you do inside the company to make sure that people understand what their individual responsibilities are. And then also you need to manage your relationships with partners and vendors. And if you're only paying attention to just the technical piece of it, like Roy was saying, you're not going to be successful. And so what the compliance things do, compliance alone won't solve the problem, but it'll take you really far down the road from where most companies are today. If you end up being able to comply with the NIST standard to a large degree, you're going to be way out in front of most organizations.
Bob, Roy, with the rise of ransom attacks that are going on, an individual has asked the question, in order to protect my organization, where do I focus? Do I focus on the government side? Do I focus on the IT side? Do I just pay the bill? What do I do? Bob, you want to handle that?
Bob, I'm going to steal it from you. Only
Go
from
ahead,
the
Roy.
sense that that is probably one of the more relevant questions that's been asked. I have had not one, not two, but 24 people tell me as we talk through what cybersecurity is today and what it means to you, and it'll come back from and no disrespect to a CTO or a CIO, is that we have all we need, and we can't even keep up with what we've got. Now you're asking us to evaluate and put things on the other side, and I'm telling you, it has been a very thankful friend inside those audiences called the CFO that stands up and says, then let me take it out of your paycheck, or let me get rid of you too if you don't think it can be there. Ransomware is done because they've been able to hack it. Ransomware is because somebody within, who knew if 6 months ago one of your outside vendors, and they're not guilty either, but I'm using them as an example, came in and placed a bad cookie somewhere and waited 6 months before they brought it up. And now it's taken over much of your system. That says you were already hacked. If you're living within compliance, if you're living within technology standards that the big people have put in place, from firewalls inside of Linux systems and that, you won't get that ransom call. If you got it, you've been hacked. So, I mean, it's one or the other. You're either going to have to spend a little more money, get more resources, or redistribute your resources to complete the picture. You only painted half the canvas. Now, see, I got up on my big pedestal on that one, but it's kind of like, oh, well, if we got it, the only way you're not going to get it is to implement both sides of that coin. You've got to implement the compliance sides that you should find the people, and they're there. One internal auditor talked to me, and he said, I'm going to champion this thing because I work from spreadsheets. And I deal with outside people from spreadsheets, and they are an extremely large retail type of company. So anyway, that's my answer. Bob, what's yours?
Well, no, I agree with what you say. I think the role of compliance is it gives you a systematic way to look at what you're doing. It's a systematic framework for ensuring that you're not just doing, a few things here and a few things there that seem to make sense from a technology point of view, but you're taking a broader look at what's going on across the company. So, yes, you need to put technology in place, but knowing what to do when and how to prioritize all that is best done if you're working off a compliance framework that gives you an idea of, what's the first thing I need to do. An example might be, if you haven't done an IC asset inventory, there's a whole lot of things that you really can't do at all, and knowing what to do first and what to do next is really important, and that's how working in a consistent way with with the compliance framework can really help.
Roy, we have another question. I'm not a big company. I'm a small company. Do all these rules and regulations apply to us?
I'm biased on that answer because it's not the size of the company, it's what you're dealing with as that company. Obviously, if you're a small company, and I'm not trying to be, if you're a drywall company and that's what you deal with and you've got 20 people, they're probably not going to spend a lot of time trying to either get ransomware or trying to shut your system down. So a lot of it is going to be on what space are you in. Are you in a hedge fund? Are you in financial investments? Are you a small regional bank? Are you in a retail environment where you handle credit cards, but you may be a boutique, but that doesn't mean you don't handle the same types and kinds and volumes of credit cards that large credit cards. Find the time. It can be done without all of a sudden giving IT millions more in resources and revenue. Sit down with a good outside group of people. Plan what you can and can't do. There are ways to begin to comply to both sides of what this is all about without going broke and without knowing the different things that have to be done. If you've got the time to have a board meeting, which is why Bob's organization went in that direction, then use it effectively. Don't come together every quarter for a day and then get up and go away. Understand and know your company. The same with C-level people. The same with CFOs who are spending money. That's a team, when put together, can bring in the resources they have internally in a company and figure out how to handle what they need to handle with what they can, and then redistribute the funds and the people to where you're completely covered. It's outside. It has to help. Done.
Bob, I have a just came up that I think is right up your alley. I'm a CFO. Can I solve these problems by buying cyber insurance? It's a lot easier just writing a check to the insurance carrier than to learn and go through all the areas you're talking about.
The answer is that's not a complete solution, and it's also probably not the one you want to do. That's really the responsible solution. The cyber insurance is a really rapidly evolving area. The insurance vendors themselves see a huge opportunity. They're projected to grow. That market's projected to grow from about $2 billion to about $20 billion by 2025. It's some of the numbers that I've seen. And so, yeah, cyber insurance is going to be around for a long time, and it's important. But the insurance vendors are having a hard time right now because, again, there's not enough data to be able to do an accurate underwriting and an accurate projection of what they should be charging. And it's also unclear how much cyber insurance should I carry. It really doesn't make sense to, it's kind of like if you had a fire hazard at your house and you saw it and you saw this arcing electric wire and you said, I'm going to take out some more insurance. That doesn't make a lot of sense. What you need to be doing is you ought to be doing an inspection of your house, top to bottom, and removing every potential risk that you can. It's the same way with your company. So I think it makes a lot more sense cyber insurance may make sense depending on what industry you're in, what size of the company you are, what kind of data you've got at risk, what the implications are for what could happen with a breach. But it makes a lot more sense for everybody to find a way to evaluate and assess the situation for their company with respect to cybersecurity and put the right measures in place, be they technology or training or how they deal with vendors.
Let me add something to that, since I deal with a number of companies who employ us to evaluate their insurance. The more work that you do internally to prepare your company will make you a better insured, and you can obtain better rates and better programs. We're finding the insurance carriers are looking more to the clients for guidance as much as the insurance individuals are the carriers for guidance. Let's see, another question has come up. Beyond the NIST standards, I've heard people talk about the HIPAA standards. I've heard them talk about the PCI compliance standards. Are there any other standards besides NIST that are usable that you employ in what you do that gives me an element of guidance?
Yes, the main one is the one I mentioned earlier, C2M2 from the Department of Energy. It's very comprehensive, and it folds into and works and fits into the NIST standard, and it makes the NIST standard deeper and stronger. So we have integrated the NIST standard and C2M2 together, and we're able to monitor over 300 control points across any organization based on that standard. What we've also done, though, in the area of these various industry standards like HIPAA, PCI, and the credit card processing industry, FINRA and financial services, and others that are on the drawing board, is we're able to overlay the information that we gather using the NIST and C2M2 standards and present a view that is then based on the particular industry standards. So with respect to HIPAA, for example, you can get a picture of where you are and how ready you are for a HIPAA audit on the cyber part of the HIPAA audit, and then you get a really good picture there so that you know exactly what you're likely to have to do.
Bob, I just got actually before Bob or Roy, sorry. Just got another question. I didn't have a chance to send it to Alan yet, sorry. Is there a software solution that will cover most aspects of NIST? We're small, no budget, no time to learn.
Well, thanks for the softball, yes.
Actually, it came from the audience. It wasn't from me.
Well, that's good. Well, I thank whoever asked it. But yeah, of course, yeah, that's what Cybernet's was formed to do. And our CMOM product, which is based on our model, which we call Cyber Governance Maturity Oversight Model, which is a combination of the NIST and C2M2 models, is a SaaS solution that runs on Amazon Web Services. So it's very non-intrusive, but it allows people to do a very rapid assessment of where they are, and then allows them in an ongoing way to continue monitoring progress, based on these over 300 control points that we're looking at. So you can see the information across the three dimensions of NIST, which are the risk management, which is all the things that you'd normally think of, risk culture, which is what are you doing across the organization, and organizational awareness and putting that in place, and then risk influence, which is how are you dealing more effectively with your relationships with partners and vendors. So the system is very comprehensive, but it's lightweight and it's easily deployable.
I think there's one other piece, Bob, that's very important, or what I'm seeing in those that I talk to. Most of us in technology, if you've been there at any point in time, talk about product. So if you buy a Cisco firewall, it's a product, and it does specific things, and it really does do specific things. What your organization has developed specifically, and I won't say you shied away from product, is a platform. It's a knowledge base of information as to where you are, what you look like, and it will, by just seeing that, you'll know if you have deficiencies or otherwise. It is not going to turn around and be a big chunk of software that has to go in and make changes. So IT involved, but not intrusive. So financial people, everybody has been made aware. It's an information portal for the entire company as to where you are based on all the things everybody's just talked about. And I go away from talking product. I hear it coming back at me constantly. It's not a product, it's a platform. It's an information portal for where you're strong, where you're weak, and what you should do to fix.
Hey, you make a good point, and there was an earlier person that asked the question about, how do I get up to speed? And people that use this system get up to speed pretty rapidly because there's information all over the system that's training you as you go along.
Okay. Next.
Roy, another question. I'm a CISO for a medium-sized company. We've made about 3 acquisitions in the last year. Is there any way that I can get a handle on how much risk we're taking? Any ideas?
Well, and I said I was not going to go into any kind. I'm not. This is not a sales environment, and it's not going to get that way. The way I would address that CISO is to give one of us that you're talking to today an opportunity to spend 30 minutes is a long time. An hour can get into quite a bit of detail. What are the 3 things that you've implemented? Who's running them? How often are they being looked at? I've got one gentleman that's down in the bowels of that whole area that manages a group of 15 people. But he's interested only, believe it or not, because it gives him a reporting mechanism up into senior management and board of directors where he's never been allowed to be involved. So there's no magic other than I would love, not just me, anyone on this panel can come and sit down with you, discuss that with you and your team, and hopefully you can walk away from there, whoever you are, knowing that at least you've got some qualified technical discussions that you need to follow on. It doesn't say product needs to be bobbed. It can be redeploying resources. It can be just internal time to get prepared and studying and understanding what's there.
I can add to that a real life example. We have a client that's a roll-up of about 10 software companies, and what they do acquisitions, and they roll those companies under, and they have that problem big time. They want to know, what's our risk across the entire organization. So what they've been able to do is they do an assessment of each of the individual entities, but then that can be rolled up in an automated way so that you can look across the entire organization and see what kind of risk levels you have, where are the places that need to be shored up the most across the different companies, what's the next steps that I should take and so forth. And they've been very happy with that. Their CISO had been trying to do this before he told us with spreadsheets and said he was failing miserably. So there are ways to do that really make sense and that are not that hard.
Thank you. That's a great ad, Bob, because I'm sure each one of those divisions or companies that they rolled up into, the assessment was structured for them, and then you take the 6 assessments or the 3 assessments the gentleman or the lady mentioned and put those on top of each other, which I'm assuming you did in a big assessment, and then they knew what to do out of it. So the tools are there if you'll just continue to run your organization successfully, treat your people in good straight. Don't say, oh, guys, guess what's coming? You're going to double the workload and cut the pay. I think first thing you need to do is sit down and plan and really know and look at what's there before you do anything else.
If the organization is one that is acquisitive, it's one that does acquisitions, this tool is really effective at helping you understand what kind of risk are we taking on when we buy this company. So when you're in the middle of due diligence on an acquisition, if you make this part of your due diligence, you can get a much better handle on what the risk is going to be once you integrate that company into the company. It may even make you decide not to buy it. So using this at a critical time like that can be really helpful as well.
I have a question, because what you're talking about in the acquisition, how does that expand into the responsibility that companies have for managing their vendors, especially since one of the things we've been talking about is the high degree of risk that comes in from outside vendors? Can you address that, Bob?
Yes. It's if you keep up with the highly publicized breaches, many of them, I would say most of them, have happened because of risk that's been introduced by a vendor relationship. And so it's not good enough for the people in procurement to say, well, I found the cheapest source, because it may not be the cheapest source if it introduces risk into your network. So our approach to that is we allow you to push out an assessment to each of your vendors. You can actually do it in a couple of ways. You can rate the vendors. If you feel like you know them well enough, you can just rate them low, medium, high as to their amount of risk and get a picture of your overall risk posture with relationship to partners. But we also enable you to push out the same kind of assessment that you're doing internally. You can push out a subset, a meaningful subset, to all of your vendors and have them self-report that information. Now, you might say, well, how do I know they're going to report it accurately? Well, all this information is held in this platform that Roy mentioned earlier, and you can have them attest that everything they do is correct, and they know that by doing that, they're going to be legally liable for the answers they're giving you. So you can get a really good picture and a really good idea of how much risk exists out there in your vendor base.
Alan, did you see the question I forwarded to you?
No, I did not. You want to read that out?
Yeah, sure. There it goes. What role does insurance play in responding to and contemplating these emerging cyber risks? Not exactly like the one that was asked earlier, but
Alan, we'll let you take that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
The insurance industry is focused on this area because of the potential growth. They have really grabbed the handle on the post-breach situation because of the cost containment considerations. If you have a breach and you have the cyber insurance, you should turn to them because they have the recommendations, people who can handle what to do, how to handle actual themselves. There is a growing body of insurance carriers who are starting to focus on the pre-breach consideration because they want to make sure, obviously, that the insured has the ability to reduce the potential of the extent of the risk, which is part of their long-term view of cost containment and increasing sales. It is an uphill battle because they themselves are trying to get a handle as to what to do and what not to do. Recent meetings within the Congress have started to request the presence of a federally sponsored national database of breaches that all the insurance carriers can participate in to supply information and obtain information in order to do their necessary pricing. The biggest problem is they don't have any records. It's very much of a wild, wild west to a certain extent. Very often the policies are written to such an extent that if you do have a breach, the amount of coverage you have is really not worth the amount that you spent for. Not all companies are obviously like that. The larger ones have very substantial programs and very, very substantial applications that take you through what should and what should not be done. But there are more and more brokers on a regular basis who are becoming more and more knowledgeable about this subject matter. And you're going to see tremendous growth over the couple of years simply because of the size of the, and as the underwriters start to develop more information. I would only go with this carrier that has a heavy focus on pre-breach protection that helps a company not only obtain insurance, but gives guidance and direction to what to do so you can become a better insured.
Patrick?
Alan, this is Bob. I'm glad you took that question because that's about as good an answer as I think anybody could give.
Well, thank you.
Patrick?
Yes.
I'm not sure how many more questions you got in Bay, but I know a couple of us have to drop off in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
We'd be happy to have those questions sent to us. We will assemble as a body and decide who is best to put it back as an answer to whoever that is. But at about 10:55, we're going to have to cut off and go to somewhere else. And I hate to do that to anybody because of the potential of questions not being answered. We are going to reconstruct a similar kind of coffee hour as early as possibly next week or week after. And again, we'll re-invite the attendees, but hopefully if we had the questions and we know where they came from and the email addresses, we will do our best to try to answer them long before that point in time, but we are going to have to cut off very quickly.
Well, to answer your question, I've got a couple that I'll definitely put together for you. So.
Okay.
Pat, also, this is Alan, let me add in that the goal of our coffee meeting is to make, you can see, very informal, not scripted, and to open it up to the easy questions as well as obviously the hard questions. We've had a lot of people with more and more questions than we had anticipated, so we're going to try and put this together on a regular basis, invite people, and also bring in additional expertise, not only the people that you have here, but people that we have contacts with in the insurance field, in the legal field, as well as software and hardware, to make this more and more of an entertaining, knowledgeable program, not just a commercial on any level whatsoever.
Right.
And Pat, I think there's one, I've kept track of them, I got the phone numbers. I've seen 9 phone numbers come in from areas I think I might have visited 10 years ago, like North Dakota and some others. I will return those calls, but if there are any of you that have additional questions that you don't feel got adequately answered or otherwise, please get them to Pat or to myself, and we will take the time to give you the answer that we can. It may not be what anyone wants to hear, but it'll be the most qualified one you can get in the space.
Exactly.
Okay?
Well, in light of pre-existing engagements, I think we'll probably wrap it up here.
Okay.
Again, I'd like to thank Bob Barker and Roy Hogsett and Alan Heyman for a quite entertaining and informative hour. And as Roy said, we'll be doing this probably next week, at the very latest the week after.
And there's many more, Pat. There are many more areas yet to be covered. My goodness. Compliance, auditing. This one kind of focused on, to me, the real meat of the substance, which is to give an entire company from board down a satisfaction that they're marching in the right direction with the right protection and coverage. But we will try to expand it next week. Again, a lot of it depends upon the question.
Excellent. All right. Well,
thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.